want to welcome you to one of the most remarkable journeys you will ever take. Come and join me as we walk the corridors of the mythological dragons and beasts of St. John's Revelation. During the 3rd century after the crucifixion of Christ, the powerful bishops and Arians came into debate on the floor of Constantinople under the guardianship of Constantine. Constantine was a Christian king, and he wanted a nation that was not divided. Thus, at the end of the debate, the Arians lost and their work was relegated to the Dark Ages. The bishops, however, knowing that humanity was illiterate, that they thought the world was the center of the universe, felt that the secret teachings of Christianity could not be given. To quote one of the early bishops, it would be like giving a weapon into the hands of a child. Among these secret teachings was the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. A new age has dawned now, and for the first time in the history of the manuscript, every single symbol will be broken and every mystery will be revealed to you. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. Welcome to another episode, Odyssey of the Apocalypse. If I remember correctly, we had just finished chapter 7 last time, and there was that beautiful scene in which the Lamb, which was in the midst of the throne, would feed the people and would lead them forth to the living waters, and God would wipe away all tears from their eyes. That is almost as beautiful as the finale of the Apocalypse. I think chapter 21, which describes the New Jerusalem, is beyond all doubt the greatest promise to mankind. It makes it all worthwhile when we think of our troubles and trials and tribulations and the difficulty of human life, to know that one day we as a people will rise above all of our differences and go on to a much greater work than we do upon this planet Earth. But at last, we are far from chapter 21, more like chapter 8. So I call chapter 8 the 7th seal. And as we open chapter 8, I go to Corinthians 1, 6:20. As you know, at the beginning of each of these, I try to put some scripture that kind of sums up the chapter that we're going into. And I chose this one. For ye are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God. Meaning that what we have in our body and our spirits, they belong to God and given to us for the use that we might share in a kingdom that we know and a kingdom yet to come that we do not know and perhaps cannot even imagine. I wrote here, through an almost impenetrable darkness, the soul seeks the purpose and reason for its existence. Then one day it realizes that there is a power which moves through all things. And then we seek unification or oneness, not only through prayer or contemplation or meditation, but through love. I've always said that love is the doorway which unlocks the door. The mind is the vehicle that takes us there. So as we enter into the 7th seal, it gets very complex, because within the 7 seals, of course, as we go on with this to the subsequent angels following the renowned 4 horses of the Apocalypse, we're going to finally hit that 7th. And it's when we take that, not the 7th seal, but the 7th angel in the 7th seal, when that angel comes forth, it is then that we finally enter into that great and wondrous battle of Armageddon. I say great and wondrous because I think John wrote it in such a manner as to make it not only challenging, but baffling. And I love the anthropos. And remember I said an anthropos was a composite figure that represents aspects in ourselves, like, for instance, lion, firstborn, teeth, sharp teeth to tear the carcass or the remnants of our inferiority out of our souls, long hair for strength. All this comprised, or is comprised, of certainly aspects that are within ourselves. So we start running into those beasts and dragons very soon now. So without further ado, if you have your trusty King James, let us open to the first verse of chapter 8. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of a half hour. Half has always represented a reflection of sunrise to sunset. In other words, if we were to awaken before the sun begins to rise in the morning, we would see the penetration of darkness as it was before the world ever began. And then as the sun begins to rise, it's almost as a light. And in the beginning, when light brought forth the manifestation of creation, it too began to shine, and from it was born the universe of the stars. So now in the morning, as we watch the sunrise, we almost see a reenactment of the birth of Earth. And of course, high noon, 12 o'clock, represents when those two selves have returned to the one and shine in the heavens. The Christ shines in the heaven as the sun in its zenith at high noon. It is for that reason we have always held church services at 11. 11 represents that time when we separate the two natures and go to the church in order to learn to bring the two into one and thus worship eternally God. So Sundays have been that perfect reflection of this. So now as he opens the seventh seal, it means that as the soul has entered into the chrysalis, which we have discussed these last two episodes, and is now in the darkness of the womb of God, that it enters into a solitude of transformational change. And it will remain there until high noon, or until the two selves have become one. And I saw the seven angels which stood before the God, and they were given seven trumpets. And of course this tells us they're going to herald the great battle. They're going to blow their trumpets. This kind of started with in the wilderness, in the Mosaic traditions, because Moses had the workers build two great trumpets. And the great trumpet, they were silver, which represented the soul. And of course, these were used to call the congregation to worship. So now we're going to come before, the soul is going to come before the throne of God. So there are seven trumpets, and they are to sound. And another angel came and stood at the altar and had a gold censer, and there was given to him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. Altar is again that symbol of the doorway between heaven and earth. In the church, it's the separation between the congregation, or even between the minister and the Bible, because the Bible lays upon the altar, thus becoming the open door by which mankind can transform. So as he comes and stands before the altar, he is in that doorway which separates heaven and earth. And the golden censer is a censer of atonement, gold being wisdom. And that much incense is given to him that he can burn away the defilement of the soul. Because as the light the divine light of God comes into the soul. It is like a great fire going into a golden censer, and the smoke begins to rise as the incense, of course, is burned, or as the impurities of the soul are burned. And the smoke of the incense which came from the prayers of saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hands. And it said that it veiled the altar, which serves as the doorway of illumination between that which is mortal and that which is God. And it was filled with the work of those that had been born. As it said, you know, the prayers of saints, the works of those that had gone on before, that left for you and I a path, whether it is in philosophy or science or one of the religions of the world. And the angel took the censer and filled it with the fire from the altar and cast it on the earth. And of course that symbolizes when that light casts its light into the soul so that it burns away all the impurities, and impurities being our hatred and our anger and judgment and criticism and the things that bring to us that separation. So he casts it onto earth, throws it into the soul, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And we talked about these before, that thundering was a matter of simply an earthquake shaking loose everything that is inside of the soul. It's beliefs. And this doesn't mean that we always believe that which is wrong. It's just simply that we have to look at everything that we do believe in, and we have to reevaluate. And we have to reevaluate our own status with the world, as well as to look at everything that we have done, not only in this life, but since the beginning of time. So, and of course, lightnings are those revelations that come, because the Battle of Armageddon is not all doomsday and destruction. As the soul begins its journey through the Via Dolorosa, or the crucifixion of the soul for the resurrection of the dead, it has, in those days when it is in the chrysalis and in the darkness of the womb of God, it also receives enlightenment, spasmodic periods in which things are revealed that we never dreamed was possible, and also things are revealed that bring to us the truth and reality of civilization. We are no more caught in the web of thinking that the universe turns around the earth, or that God built this world and set it aside out of the 150 billion galaxies to be some special planet. To God, all planets are special, as all suns are. So these illusions that we have always believed in are suddenly torn to threads inside of us, because we began to see the reality, how we are an integral part of the wondrous web that constitutes the universe. I remember in the days when I was in fundamental Christianity, before the great mystical visions began, and I, of course, like most people, had been saved, and I think I was about 12 years old, and went on into, as we went on into other fundamental beliefs, that I thought death was death. I thought when you were dead, you were in the ground, and that was it. For me to think that it's only the body that dies, and that the soul is so immortal, and that infinity, we have been given a life of infinity. For me, I thought it was just a life of a lifetime. We were born, we got old, and we died. Oh, what a wondrous world opened up when I discovered that we are still in our infancy here upon this planet, and that ahead for us lies things that are very difficult to imagine. What a wonderful future infinity is, and how tremendously immortal. So thunder, lightnings, and earthquakes. And the 7 angels, which had the 7 trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. And when I teach this in the class, I always like to get up and say, now watch out. It's either the worst or the best that is yet to come. Because once the angels start trumpeting or blowing the trumpets, we're in for it. The first angel sounded, oops, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the 3rd part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Again, remember before we go into this that we're purifying 3 aspects, the soul and the mind and the body. So this first one that sounds is laying waste to the soul. It's the pollution of the soul through the purification of the great light, which causes it to sacrifice its affinity for worldly things. There is no other way that we would break our attachments for this earth if it were not for the chrysalis. And the outer enticements of the soul were burned up as though by a great fire, meaning that everything outside is closed to us now as we began this wondrous transformation. Enough is given to us, however, to be able to work in the outside world. And I think I mentioned this last week, that it isn't given to us that we cannot function in earth as we are passing through the resurrection of the dead. We are given just enough allowance to be able to function in earth. But most of what is happening is going to be happening within. I remember in the early days of seeing a flower, and it struck me strangely because so much inward was being changed that I had so little awareness to the outside world, and being rather astounded that there were flowers in the world. And I said, there is a flower. God still lives. Then the 2nd angel sounded, and it were a great mountain burning with fire, and it was cast into the sea, and the 3rd part of the sea became as blood. Whatever we look at, we must look at the mind as the sea. So this means the mountain, and guess what our mountain is? Self-will. It was endowed for us to have free will or self-will. It has assured our survival through the last 10 million years of human life. And now comes the time when self-will must pass away and surrender itself to divine will. Many people are afraid of this because they're afraid they will become as a vegetable. But I promise you that to surrender self-will for divine will is not quite so difficult if you just remember how much trouble we always get into under self-will. So the great mountain is self-will, and it's now aflame with the fires of purification, and it's cast into the sea or the mind. And when it says becomes as blood, remember blood is a form of sacrifice, and so as it becomes a sea of blood, we're brought face to face with our iniquities, if we want to call them that. We're brought face to face with our hatreds and anger and jealousy, so that we can fight the wily old dragon who causes it and win and rise undefeated. The 3rd part of the creatures were in the sea and had life and died. And the 3rd part of the ships were destroyed. And so a 3rd part of the creatures represents the impurities of the mind. And of course they are in the ship. These are it's ideas and concepts that flow in this vast ocean. Let me get up and show you what this vast sea is, because pretty soon we're going to be turning the key which opens the bottomless pit. And there's no difference between this endless sea and the bottomless pit. We always think in terms perhaps of the mind as being something. We think in terms of the brain as thinking. Well, the brain is nothing more than an instrument for the mind, and the mind is nothing more than the soul utilizing that aspect in order to work through the brain. In other words, the mind is created by all of the, I'm not going to call it senses, but is created by the soul and its actions as it flows through the body. So mind is not a separate thing in reality. And so as I go here to the board, and we draw this familiar figure that we have had now for a long time, and we draw the descent of the Christ, which places us in that remarkable chrysalis stage. We are caught with the purifications of the physical world, which has with them, I guess I could write physical out here, with the physical world, and is always related to feelings and emotions, as well as the lower mind. I say the lower mind, that part which enables us to function in day-to-day existence. It is not the higher mind or the consciousness and mind of God, which is our higher mind, but rather this lower mind, which we come to know pretty much, or believe pretty much, that it is ourself. And we've drawn these before. And remember that they are encased by this kind of ethereal substance known as a sheath, which contains within it the physical, the feeling, the emotions, and the lower mind. This being the lower mind, this the feelings and emotions, and the physical body. And that these five constitutes our bondage by the four elements to the world of matter, and also constitutes, of course, our Satan, that which we are going to combat as we journey on through the Armageddon battle. So between here and between this, the outer fringes of this subtle sheath that contains the lower body, and before we come to that within the realm of the soul, which is now encased by the Christ and is in the chrysalis, being transformed, we have here what is later going to be known as the bottomless pit, but that sea where all and everything that we have been is stored. Back there is the memory pattern since the beginning of time. Many of these are good and some of them are bad. Everything now, every doorway is going to be dumped out or opened and emptied so that we can purify. Because as long as there is this, the sea or the bottomless pit, as long as it exists, there is no union between finite and infinite. To the psychologist, this forms and relegates what is known as the subconscious mind. So psychiatry and psychology today have barely touched upon the levels or penetrated the levels of the subconscious. Normally we're looking at only the existence of this person since they were a child, not at their existence since the beginning of time. In that we have always been then, or however, we can always assume we will be forever. But back to this for a little while. So the ships are destroyed, and these ideas and concepts that float in our mind like ships, they are now destroyed. And so we go to the next angel, and that would be verse 10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven. Well, it's bad enough, isn't it, that we had to lose self-will. But now we've got to destroy the ego. And what is the ego comprised of? The physical body, emotions and feelings and lower mind, and the subtle sheath that bind us to earth. So there fell a great star from heaven, which is the ego, and that's also, by the way, going to be Satan and also the dragon that we're going to fight. And it's burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon a third part of the rivers and the fountains of water. So it entered the mind with its false aspirations and attachments to worldly things and self-pride. All of this is going to be destroyed. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood. And many men died in the waters because they were made bitter. And wormwood is a wasteland plant that grows in Israel. Actually, it's in purification or making it into salves and things like this. It has an almost fragrant smell at first, but after it's placed on the skin in there, and when the heat begins to come up, it takes upon itself a smell that is of wormwood. And so it is a bitter wasteland plant, and it represents the desolation of the soul as it enters into this transformational change of the resurrection. So, and that's what happens to the mind. The mind becomes, when it sees, oh boy, I hate this person, but I can't hate them any longer, or I dislike them, or I've done these things, and now how am I going to atone for them and to make things right with the world? So all these things die so that we can have peace. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon. Remember, the sun is the physical body representing one of the three. The sun representing the physical body. It means we go through purifications of our corporeal world. The third part is the moon, which is the mind. And now the mind is purified from all of the tendencies that bring separation. And then the third part is the stars. And these, of course, are those false aspirations and ideals, things which the soul has attached itself through as it has journeyed through the corporeal world of matter. And it said, and day shone not on a third part of it, and the night likewise, meaning that as far as the soul goes, the day shall not shine upon it, or light shine upon it until the journey is finished. I beheld, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying a loud voice, oops, I say this, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpets of the three angels, because there are three more yet to sound. Well, we thought we just about had enough of that one, didn't we? And now all of a sudden we find out there are three more that's going to sound. All I can say is, I think we're in for it. What do you think? I stop here because the intent of revealing the mysteries of Revelation is not to frighten people off from the transformation of human to divine, but more to prepare them. As we mentioned last week, many people in devotional surrender to Jesus or in other religions and philosophies, but we really are familiar with this through Christianity. In this abject devotional surrender, where Jesus becomes just everything to the soul, or God becomes everything, then unfortunately they enter into this dark night and are not aware of what has happened. And how many were locked in mental institutions and given lobotomies and drugs and medication because they heard voices. Why, to hear voices is one of the most natural things in the world. And certainly you cannot enter into the transformational change and with Christ and all of his angels, the Christ consciousness, with all of the angels of God coming forth to temper you and to purify you without being able to see and hear beyond realms which are beyond the physical realm. So I have no idea of the numbers that may have passed through these 2,000 years and how very few were able to rise from this. I mean, to realize what was happening to them, like St. John of the Cross, who wrote Dark Night of the Soul, which we were looking at last week. These few knew and understood what was happening to them and believed what was happening. But imagine those that do not. I do not know how many times in the process of my travels that someone said, I'm a reincarnation of Jesus, and I'm waiting to be heralded. I got a letter one time and said, they said they were reincarnation and that they were waiting for someone to acknowledge them. And I wrote back and said that it would be quite some time before anyone would acknowledge them, because many had those feelings. It is the Christ who is the Messiah. It is never us, the physical. It is never us, the mind or the soul. It is always that indwelling Christ. But unfortunately, as we give birth to this indwelling Christ or raise him from the dead, we confuse ourselves with the Messiah, therefore coming to believe that we are instead the Messiah. How much sadness has fallen upon people because of such beliefs. This resurrection of the dead is not called messianic initiation by happenstance, but because the person comes to believe that they are the Messiah, or many do. So, to me, to be able to teach the apocalypse, to be able to prepare mankind, or be one of those that helps prepare mankind for this wondrous transformation and journey, to me is very special. And I don't want people to enter this into darkness and unknowingness. I don't want them to be locked away and into mental institutions, or to go to doctors and get medication which will dull their minds so they cannot think. I am not saying that this battle of Armageddon is easy, but it is so worthwhile, and it does not last forever. It is not something which takes place for generation after generation. 10, 15, 20 years, it's over, at least the worst of it. And you have peace and happiness, and you see the world through different eyes, and you've developed and honed some of the magnificence that's in you, and you'll do what you never thought was ever possible. Surely the difficulties of such a transformation is well worthwhile, because what is 20 or 25 years? Upon the winds of time, upon eternity. Human life is over 10 billion years old, and we complain about 15 or 20 years? No, it will pass, it will end, and when it does, you will rejoice over everything that has happened. Well, I guess with maybe that, we will be able to face the 3 angels that are yet to sound their trumpets. Remember, you're not going through this alone. You will never enter this until you have entered into the resurrection of the dead. And when you have, the Christ is alive and well, has been risen in you, and he, the warrior upon the valiant horses of the apocalypse, shall certainly ride forth and be your champion in every issue of the forthcoming battle. He has never lost a soul. I do not think that he will lose you or me. Which takes us to bottom 9 and the bottomless pit. I chose a scripture here from Romans 8:11, thinking it probably to mean the most. And if you listen to it close, but if the spirit of him that raised up Jesus from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Christ from the dead shall also quicken your mortal bodies by his Spirit that dwells in you. The scripture so plainly says that there is a Spirit that raised Jesus up and also will quicken our mortal bodies and raise us after the same fashion. Well, are you ready for the bottomless pit? We hope so. The fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven fall from heaven unto earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. I'm thinking of a story that depicts this so very well, because it is the things that lead us into temptation are done to us for us to overcome. It's not a matter that we are led by some evil power to do the things that are in contrary to natural and cosmic law, or things that are contrary to God. We are prone sometimes to think that way, but it is the fact that in this story, I rather like it. I put upon a suit of clothes, and I went forth, and I saw Satan, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we began to battle. I lost, and I'm glad. Then I put upon myself another suit of clothes stronger than the first, and I went forth, and I saw Satan, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we began to battle, and I lost, and I'm glad. And then I put upon myself another suit of clothes, stronger than the second. And I went forth, and I saw Satan, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we began to battle. And I lost, and I am glad. And then I put upon myself a suit of light, of immortality. And I went forth, and I saw Satan, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we began to battle. And the battle was long and hard. And in the end, we merged and ascended. So what I'm trying to say, that this spirit in us leads us into temptation for but one reason: to put us into the circumstances which will help us to overcome. Not only does he lead us into them, but he also bails us out when the path becomes too difficult. So that is why it is saying that here is divine will. The light has come, the angel, and here's come a great light, and holds the key to the bottomless pit. So that indwelling Christ, our champion, holds the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit. Remember, we looked at that on the board. He opened up the portals of the subconscious mind. And everything that we thought we had forgotten when we were but small children, we remember it all. The time we hit Billy across the street because he pulled our hair. The time we borrowed $25 from someone and didn't pay it back. The time when we saw a person sitting by the side of the street begging, and we were unkind. We laughed and scoffed. Every one of these memories now are brought back to us, so that we will never again do these things which have hurt another person. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there rose smoke out of the pit, and the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and air were darkened by reason of the smoke in the pit. It meant that the corporeal world is now darkened as we live in the chrysalis, much more aware of this internal transformation than we are of the outside world. And of course it is like a great furnace burning up our indiscretions in life. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and to them was given power as scorpions of earth have power. And I kind of love the imaging of this. I can see here all these locusts are, forgive me, I know they're God's creatures, but they are ugly things. Anyway, here they all come marching out like horses, and they're ready to just consume and eat everything that is in front of them. If you've watched an army of locusts, they clean off everything. So it's just that the soul bears witness to its misdeeds and dishonor, and these things are kind of like locusts laying waste to the fertile fields of the past. And to them is given the power of scorpions, that their sting might remind the soul of its iniquitous nature. There's not much I can say about a scorpion. To me, they're not very beautiful either. But we can say, think of the image that we used to have of Satan or the devil in that red suit of underwear that waltzed through medieval Christianity that had a scorpion tail. Of course, red represents sacrifice, and cloven hooves represent the two natures descended in the world of matter. But the scorpion tail means that every time we do a wrong, it stings us. In other words, we suffer whenever we do a wrong, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously. We still, if we eat too much cake, after a holiday or a birthday, we become ill. If we hate someone or we're angry at them, we don't speak to them and they don't speak to us. And we go through life with bitterness and separation between ourselves. So it is kind of like the sting of a scorpion and the marching of all these locusts across our minds. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of earth, neither any green thing or any tree, but only those men who did not have the seal of God in their foreheads, meaning those that did not have the mark of the Christ or the Star of David, those who had not yet passed through the resurrection. And they were given instruction not to hurt anything that was good, but to only hurt that which is bad. I put a footnote down here that said, as the soul passes through the dark night, it knows that its suffering is being administered by forces it cannot see and may not even understand. However, as the days lengthen and the soul rises out of the deep abyss that it carved for itself, through its defilement, the impure is destroyed, even as the good is strengthened through purgation and great revelation. So they've been told not to hurt the good. So you can assure yourself that while you're going through this, the only thing that's going to be destroyed in you is that which separates you from your fellow man and keeps you from your peace and happiness upon earth. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented for 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it striketh a man. Of course it's not going to kill you physically or mentally, emotionally, or even your soul. But of course the 5 months means it is going to torment you, as torment a person, as long as that person has not yet entered into the resurrection and freed themselves from the 4 elements. Remember, it's the 4 elements that binds us, the soul, to the world of matter, almost like the crucified upon a cross, 4 elements. So 5 months means 4 elements, or that period which binds the soul to the corporeal world. So it's only going to affect us as long as we are bound to the corporeal senses. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. I think that when we believe that saving meant that we would not have to go through the resurrection of the dead, we were always consoled that this is something that would not happen to us. But it is that we don't like to look at ourselves. We would much rather prefer to blame someone else for the things that happen to us. And there does come a time when we have to accept the responsibility that everything that does happen is our responsibility. If someone is angry at us, it's our problem if we allow that anger to make us angry in return. That person's anger is not causing us to be angry. Only we are causing ourselves to be angry. And that's what Jesus was trying to teach when he said, turn the other cheek. Because in our own anger at that person who is angry at us, we're the ones that suffer. The other person is suffering too, but they are not the cause of our suffering. We're causing our own suffering by allowing it to affect us. Oh no, we're not going to get over these habits overnight. That's why this transformational change takes so many years, is because it takes time to purify and to change our way of thinking, even if that time is only a minute in the space of time. And shall we want to seek death? Well, we do want to seek escape. We don't really want to look inside of ourselves. We don't really want to see these things that we've done. And more importantly, we don't even want to make atonement for them. We don't want to undo them, because that is too painful. But the Christ has risen. He is the warrior. And we will be brought to that moment of correcting the things that we have done. And from that, there is no escape. And the shapes of the locusts like are in horses in battle, and on their heads were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And of course, we talked about the locusts being these false ideals and concepts and things that rest in the mind. And of course, the senses, the mind with its senses has ruled over the soul and the corporeal body. Yes, the soul is flowing through the mind, through the brain, but nevertheless, these are the things that have ruled over it. So that's why the locusts have crowns of gold, because these ideas have ruled us. And their faces are as the face of men, meaning they have ruled over us in the corporeal world. They have hair as women and teeth of lions. And of course, the hair of women, we have to almost go back to the time of Samson and Delilah in order to realize that it means, hair means, of course, strength. So their hair was as a woman, then strength and beauty. And they had teeth as lions. And that was so that they might tear the carcass of self-will. Again, self-will has led us down the path of corporeal enticements into those things which bring us so much unhappiness. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was a sound of chariots of many horses running into battle. And iron is iron will. It was often looked at as God being iron will. And this means that he never deviates from his divine plan. So in that their breastplates are made of iron, it means that it is strength, and it is, there's nothing that we can do but to do what we have to do. His iron will is very strong. And and the thoughts of the soul are kind of like a tumult, the sound of a chariot pulled by horses running into battle, because the mind goes around and all these things are flooding through us. But at the time that we're seeing our iniquities, we are also learning. We are now, you remember, we're plugged into the large computer, in which the large computer downloads into the small computer. So we are learning knowledge faster than, I don't know how to describe it, faster than you will ever learn in the years of college. We learn more in months and weeks and months and years than we would learn in many lifetimes. We are shown the basis and mysteries of religion and philosophy and psychology and medicine and everything that makes the world go round. So as a result of this, along with this, we still have these great revelations. So that rather consoles us as we're journeying in this darkness and in the throes of the beginning of the battle. And they had, of course, tails like scorpions. That means that for every wrong, we're going to be stung. And the thing that I find so amazing about it is that it's instantly, it becomes instant. In the past, we could do something wrong, and we would hold it inside of us for 5 years or 10 years, and we would do nothing to resolve it, like perhaps being angry at someone else, or judgmental or critical, or something like this. So we would hold it, and every time we think about it, you get angry all over again. And so now, when you do something, you instantaneously know that you have done something wrong. And the result is you immediately can correct it. And that means that you never again have to go back into the past where to undo the things that were not undone before. As you move on into donning the suit and cloak of light, immortalization, you will never take these things with you. They are all destroyed as soon as they happen. So, of course, their power is to hurt man for 5 months. It only bothers as long as we're bound by the corporeal world, by those 4 elements. And it does end. I think what I want to do, I noticed from my cameraman that our time is not, is kind of running out. But I think I will take the time to once again try to show you what period we're in the Via Dolorosa. I'm going to erase this on the board right now and take us back to rather that kind of that first part in which we were at that great gateway. And if you remember, there were 2 tests before we were ever able to enter into the resurrection of the dead. The first was the testing of mortal versus immortal, meaning that we would be brought, here we would be faced with that decision of whether we wanted to go on or whether we were caught in the corporeal world by our attachments. And that the second phase was that of the purification, in which, or certain experiences that would happen that did the scourging. As you remember, Jesus, when he was crucified on the Via Dolorosa, he first was to fight Lucifer on the mountain of Quarantana, and then he later, as he stood trial on the crucifixion, he would be scourged. And then we passed through the descent of the Spirit to live in the flesh. And then we are hitting a period where we are right now is the Spirit has descended. The resurrection of the dead has been accomplished, and he will live evermore. The purifications now are going to take place between here and here. It is said that Jesus fell twice upon the Via Dolorosa, or there were 2 falls. The first one is at this gate, which represents 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th gate. For most people, as they enter into the resurrection of the dead, actually this phase of it seems to take precisely 5 years. And this is a part in which the person is freed from the bondment of the 4 elements. And with this comes all powers. Not only is the soul and mind purified and freed from this, but they began to understand every power, discernment, healing, prophecy, and be able to use them all. You know, we talked about how many fell in the 5th gate because of the messianic contribution of feeling they were the Messiah of the world, rather than going on past that gate into the next aspect. And they had a king over them. Now these scorpions have a king, and of course we know who that is, that self-will, had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but the Greek tongue hath the name Apollon, or god of war. So now we have Abaddon is the ruler over the unawakened, meaning those ruling over those who are not yet, are still in darkness and not yet born into the resurrection. So he has ruled over this abyss of subconsciousness and is known as the destroyer. Well, I am called to say that our time is almost up and that we will have to continue with this chapter next week. But I would like to leave you with the memories of this, that light is stronger than death. Good shall forever defeat evil, and that we as a human race shall not lose. I'll see you next week. Please be with me.